It was a quiet Monday morning in Ridgewood County, the kind of small American town where nothing exciting ever seemed to happen. The police station sat in the center of town like a forgotten brick block, aging, understaffed, and filled with officers who had grown far too comfortable with their power. No one expected a storm to arrive that morning, especially not in the form of a man who looked like he had stepped right out of an old action movie. Steven Seagal walked slowly down the sidewalk, wearing a simple black jacket, dark jeans, and sunglasses. His hair tied back, his face calm, unreadable. He wasn't here for attention. In fact, he hoped no one would recognize him yet. He had come to Ridgewood on a confidential assignment, to evaluate the department's leadership, discipline, and conduct. The town didn't know. The officers didn't know. Only the mayor and the governor were aware that Steven Seagal had been appointed as the new incoming chief of police, starting today. But Steven wanted to see the truth with his own eyes before he officially stepped inside. Across the street, two officers leaned against their patrol car, Officer Miller and Officer Trent. They were known around town for their arrogance. They didn't protect the community, they intimidated it. And the moment they saw Steven walking toward the station, they straightened up. "Hey," Miller barked, stepping forward. "You can't loiter around here." Steven paused, lifting his sunglasses just enough to look at them calmly. "I'm just walking," he said softly. Trent scoffed. "Walking? This is official police property. State your business." Steven didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at them, calm, still, unshaken. That irritated them. Miller moved closer. "Don't ignore me. Who do you think you are?" Steven remained silent. Trent jabbed a finger toward him. "ID now." But Steven continued standing there, relaxed, hands at his sides. That was the moment Miller snapped. "You want to play tough guy?" And before anyone could react, he slapped Steven across the face. A sharp, humiliating hit that echoed through the empty street. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He didn't even blink. He slowly turned his head back toward the officer. And what happened next would make the entire station freeze in fear. Officer Miller's slap echoed through the quiet parking lot like a gunshot. A couple of civilians across the street froze mid-step. Even the birds on the telephone line scattered at the sudden noise. But the strangest thing of all was Steven Seagal's reaction. He didn't react. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step back. He didn't even lift a hand. He simply stood there, as if Miller had slapped a stone wall. That lack of reaction unsettled both officers more than any threat could have. "What's wrong with you?" Trent barked. "Didn't you hear him?" "ID now." Steven's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I heard him." "Then do it," Trent shouted, stepping closer, trying to impose dominance. But nothing about Steven moved, not his shoulders, not his feet, not even his breathing. He stood there like a man carved out of granite. And for the first time, Miller hesitated. Something about this wasn't normal. Still, arrogance overpowered instinct. Miller shoved Steven in the chest. Hard. Steven's boots didn't move an inch. "What the hell?" Miller muttered under his breath. This wasn't how old men were supposed to react. Most people stumbled back or made excuses. This man didn't do either. Trent saw the hesitation and felt the need to look tougher. He puffed his chest and stepped forward, pointing aggressively. "You deaf or something?" "I said hand over your ID." Steven let out a slow exhale, as if centering himself. "You really don't want to keep doing this," he said softly. Trent laughed loudly. "Oh, I think I do." Miller joined in, his confidence returning. "Who do you think you are, huh? Some kind of martial arts master?" Steven's head tilted slightly. "Something like that." Some nearby pedestrians had noticed the commotion and started filming. One whispered, "Is that who I think it is?" But the officers didn't even turn to look. They were too caught up in the power rush. Trent shoved Steven again. "I'm talking to you." Steven didn't blink. Trent's face reddened. "You better start giving answers." "I gave you one," Steven replied. "You just didn't want to hear it." Miller snapped again. "I'll make him hear something." He reached for Steven's wrist, trying to twist it behind his back. The instant Miller touched him, Steven made the smallest movement, barely noticeable. A shift of balance, a rotation of his hips, a subtle turn of his wrist. Miller felt a sharp pain shoot up his arm, and before he could register what happened, Steven had reversed the grip, without using force, without aggression, almost gently, leaving Miller immobilized. Trent's eyes widened. "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Let him go." Steven released Miller, who stumbled back, clutching his wrist in shock. Trent panicked and reached for his baton. "All right, old man. Now you're resisting an officer." Before he could swing, Steven stepped slightly to the side. Not fast, not dramatic, just precise. The baton whooshed past empty air. Trent lost balance, stumbled forward, and crashed into the patrol car hood. Civilians gasped. Cameras zoomed in. Miller recovered, furious and embarrassed. "That's it. You're going to jail." Steven raised an eyebrow. "For walking on a sidewalk? For assaulting an officer?" Miller screamed. "Assault." Steven said lightly, "Maybe you should check your cameras. I didn't touch either of you first." Miller froze. He had forgotten about the body cams. Trent cursed under his breath. "Body cams are off," he whispered to Miller. Miller smirked. "Exactly. No proof." Now Steven finally looked disappointed. Not angry, not threatened, just disappointed. "You turned them off on purpose," he said quietly. "That tells me everything I needed to know." Miller stepped forward again. "You think you're smart? You think you're better than us?" "No," Steven replied. "But I think you just made a career-ending mistake." Trent spat on the ground. "The only mistake here was you walking into Ridgewood." Steven stared at them with an expression that felt far older than he looked. "I came here to help this place," he said, almost to himself. "But now I see why they needed me." "What?" Trent snapped. "What's that supposed to mean?" Steven didn't answer. Instead, he reached slowly, very slowly, into his jacket. Both officers panicked instantly. "He's going for a weapon," Trent shouted. Miller pulled out his taser. "Drop it. Drop whatever is in your pocket." The bystanders screamed. Some ducked behind cars. But Steven didn't drop anything. He simply pulled out a white envelope, sealed with the official state emblem. Miller frowned. "What is that?" Steven held it in his hand, but didn't open it. "Something you both should have known before you laid a hand on me." The crowd leaned in. Cameras zoomed closer. The tension was thick enough to choke on. The officers exchanged confused looks. "Open it," Miller demanded. Steven looked at him calmly. "I will," he said, "but you're not going to like what it says." The envelope in Steven Seagal's hand seemed to glow under the sunlight as the officers stared, wide-eyed and confused. The bystanders didn't know what was inside, but they knew it wasn't good news for the officers. Not after how they treated him. Miller swallowed hard. "What's in that envelope?" Steven didn't answer. He simply turned it slowly in his fingers, almost like he was deciding whether the officers were even worthy of knowing. The calmness in his movements only made them more nervous. Trent pointed at him with his baton. "Don't play games. Open it." Steven looked at him with a quiet warning in his eyes. "You don't give me orders, son." The firmness of his voice froze Trent mid-breath. The baton trembled slightly in his grip. He tried to hide it, but the camera phones caught everything. Two more officers came out of the station after hearing all the shouting. Officer Ramirez and Sergeant Collins. Ramirez looked confused. Collins, older and heavier, walked with the kind of arrogance that came from years of unchecked authority. "What's going on here?" Collins demanded. Miller quickly pointed at Steven. "This guy attacked us and refused to show ID." Steven raised an eyebrow. "You slapped me. Twice. And shoved me. And cut off your body cams." Ramirez's eyes widened. "You turn off body cams?" Again, Collins shot him a warning look, and Ramirez fell silent instantly. Collins stepped towards Steven with a smug grin. "I don't know who you think you are, old man, but you're interfering with police operations." Steven turned his head slightly. "By standing on a sidewalk. By refusing orders." Collins barked. "Now put that envelope down." Steven didn't even blink. No. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one talked to Collins like that. No one. But Steven Seagal wasn't no one. Miller stepped close to Collins and whispered urgently, "Sarge, I think he's dangerous." Collins scoffed. "He's just another stubborn idiot who needs discipline." That was the moment the rookie officer, Evan Brooks, stepped out of the station. He was young, fresh-faced, and still believed the badge meant something noble. He froze the moment he saw Steven's face. His jaw dropped. Eyes widened. Color drained from his cheeks. "Oh my God," he whispered. "No way. That's Steven Seagal." The other officers laughed. Miller smirked. "Yeah, right. And I'm Tom Cruise." Trent joined in. "What's next?" "He's our new boss." Evan didn't laugh. He took a shaky step forward. "No, I'm serious. That's really him." Collins waved him off. "Kid, go back inside. You're embarrassing yourself." But Evan didn't move. He kept staring at Steven like he was looking at a legend. Because he was. He cleared his throat nervously. "Sir? Mr. Seagal, is that really you?" Steven turned his head toward the rookie and nodded once, silently. Evan nearly fainted. Trent rolled his eyes. Even if he is a washed-up actor, who cares? That one sentence made Steven slowly lift his gaze toward Trent, like a predator acknowledging an annoying fly. Trent felt a cold shiver run up his spine. Collins, unaware of the danger, took a step closer. "I don't care if you're a movie star," he growled. "In my town, you follow my rules." Steven's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Good to know," he said quietly. "I'll remember that." The tension electrified the air. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Evan tried again. "Sarge, you really need to stop. He's not just an actor. He's—" Collins cut him off. "I said get inside." Evan didn't move. He looked at Steven again and whispered, "Sir, should I call the mayor?" The officers froze. "The mayor?" Trent repeated. "Why the hell would the mayor care?" Steven held up the envelope slightly. "You're about to find out." Miller's confidence cracked. "What's that supposed to mean?" Steven didn't open it yet. Instead, he took one slow step forward. Miller and Trent stepped back instinctively. Ramirez raised his hands as if to stop a ghost. Collins stood still, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. Steven's voice dropped to a calm, deadly whisper. "I came here to see this department for what it really is." "And what do you think it is?" Collins snapped. Steven gave a tiny shrug. "Rotten, undisciplined, and led by men who shouldn't wear a badge." Collins puffed up his chest. "You're in no position to judge us." Steven slipped a hand into his jacket and pulled out a second item, a small, black leather folder. Everyone stared. He flipped it open. Inside was an official badge, a badge none of them had ever seen before. Collins leaned in, confused. What badge is that?" Steven's eyes locked onto his. "State-appointed law enforcement." He paused. "Senior rank." Ramirez's jaw dropped. Miller muttered a curse. Trent blinked rapidly, as if trying to understand what was happening. Steven wasn't done. He slowly lifted the envelope again. "You boys really want me to open this?" Collins swallowed. What's inside?" Steven's voice was quiet, but final. "Your future." The crowd erupted with whispers. Cameras shook with excitement. The officers stood like statues, unsure whether they were seconds away from a promotion or a disaster. And Steven Seagal, calm as a sleeping tiger, tore the envelope open. The envelope fluttered open in Steven Seagal's hands like a silent herald of doom. The officers leaned in, curious and skeptical. Miller, Trent, and Collins all expected some mundane paperwork, maybe a transfer order, maybe a reprimand, maybe nothing at all. They were wrong. Inside was a letter on official state letterhead. The words were typed with authority, every line dripping with consequence. Effective immediately, Steven Seagal is appointed as the new chief of police for Ridgewood County. The words sank in slowly. First Miller, then Trent, then Collins. Their jaws fell in unison. The entire street seemed to freeze around them. Even the nearby bystanders gasped. Phones rose instinctively, capturing every second. Miller shook his head. No way. This has to be fake. Trent laughed nervously. Yeah, right. Who's going to believe this? Steven's calm gaze didn't waver. He looked directly at them, letting the weight of the truth settle over them like a heavy fog. This, he said, holding up the letter, is the result of years of investigation into your behavior, your attitude, and the way you treat the public. And now it's official. Collins tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in his throat. His hands trembled as he reached for his radio. I need confirmation. Steven shook his head slowly. No confirmation needed. The law doesn't need your permission to work. You've already confirmed everything about yourself with your actions today. The crowd was buzzing. Whispers flew. Is that Steven Seagal? No, it can't be. That's the guy from Under Siege. Even a few officers who had been on the sidelines began to murmur among themselves. The legend, the martial arts master, the actor. He wasn't just a story anymore. He was standing right in front of them, official authority in hand. Trent finally broke the silence. You can't just walk in here and... Steven tilted his head slightly, letting a faint, almost imperceptible smile cross his face. I can, and I did, and I will. Starting today, your actions, your decisions, and your discipline will reflect the law, not your ego. Miller's face went pale. He glanced at Trent and Collins, as if silently asking, what do we do now? The crowd erupted, some clapping, some whispering rapidly into phones. One bystander stepped forward cautiously. Sir, do you want us to call the media? Steven shook his head. No, let them watch this unfold naturally. Actions speak louder than headlines. Even the youngest rookie, Evan Brooks, had tears in his eyes. He's really here to clean things up. Steven turned slowly to face the officers who had slapped and shoved him earlier. You three, he said, voice calm but powerful. Your behavior today is exactly why you need new leadership. And now you have it. Collins swallowed hard. What happens now? Steven's gaze didn't soften. Now, you learn respect. You learn discipline. You learn what it means to serve your community, not abuse your authority. And I will make sure every action you take reflects that from this moment forward. The officers didn't move. They couldn't. The weight of the moment, the realization that they had been publicly humiliated and stripped of their unearned power, had frozen them in place. A bystander whispered excitedly into their phone. Guys, he just announced he's the new chief. The officers who slapped him, they have no clue how badly they just messed up. Miller finally muttered, almost to himself. We can't fight this. Evan stepped closer, whispering nervously. Sir, should we evacuate the station? Call everyone. Steven shook his head. No, let them see the truth. Let them understand what leadership really means. The camera phones around them zoomed in on the officers' faces, fear, shame, confusion. And then, slowly, the crowd began to cheer. Not loudly at first, but steadily. Steven didn't smile or gloat. He simply adjusted the envelope in his hand and said, quietly but firmly, respect isn't given. It's earned. And today, I've earned the right to lead. You, all of you, will learn it the hard way if necessary. The street erupted into murmurs and gasps as the realization spread. The legendary actor, martial artist, and now the new chief of police wasn't a myth. He was real. He was in charge. And the officers who had disrespected him were about to face the consequences. The street had gone silent, except for the soft hum of camera phones capturing every second. Officers Miller, Trent, and Collins stood frozen, their faces pale, unsure whether to flee, argue, or faint. Even the bystanders were holding their breath, sensing that this was a turning point. Steven Seagal didn't rush. He didn't need to. Every step he took, every gesture, conveyed authority, calm, precise, unshakable. I want to make one thing very clear, Steven said, his voice low but carrying across the street. This isn't about fame. It isn't about movie roles. It isn't about me. The officers blinked. Confusion mixed with fear. This is about justice. About respect. About leadership that doesn't hide behind fear, intimidation, or ignorance. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. You, he said, pointing directly at Miller and Trent, and you, nodding at Collins, have failed the people you swore to protect. And you did it in the most public, humiliating way possible, on a sidewalk, in front of witnesses. Miller's hands shook. We didn't know who you were. Steven didn't flinch. He looked straight at him, piercing, like an unspoken challenge. I don't care who you think I am. Respect isn't optional. It isn't conditional. And it certainly isn't given because of ignorance or arrogance. It's earned through action. Trent tried to interject, but No, Steven said, his calm voice snapping like a whip. You listen. You have been given the power of a badge. But power without accountability is nothing but chaos. The bystanders murmured in agreement. A few clapped softly. The energy on the street shifted. Officers who were once dominant now looked small, defeated, even embarrassed. Steven took another step forward. His gaze swept across the remaining crowd, both civilians and law enforcement. Every decision you make from this moment forward will reflect not just your integrity, but the integrity of this department. Every action, every word, every gesture matters. Collins tried to maintain composure. You can't. Steven interrupted, voice dropping lower, almost a whisper that still carried authority. Watch closely. I've spent decades studying combat, discipline, and leadership. I don't need to strike to assert authority, because real authority comes from control, respect, and knowledge. You can either follow it, or you will fail spectacularly. Miller's face turned red with frustration and fear. You think this is a joke? Steven shook his head slowly. No joke. This is the reality you created. By abusing your power, you invited accountability. And I am here to enforce it. The crowd now cheered softly. Phones continued recording. It was clear, Steven wasn't angry. He was commanding respect, without threats, without violence. That calm, unwavering authority terrified the officers more than any physical confrontation could. Evan Brooks, the rookie who recognized Steven earlier, whispered to another officer. He's not bluffing. Look at them. They know they messed up. Miller tried one last desperate tactic. And what if we resist? We have years of experience here. Steven smiled faintly, almost sadly. Experience without wisdom is worthless. You've spent years thinking your badge made you untouchable. Today, you learned it does not. Compliance isn't about fear. It's about understanding responsibility, and you've shown none. Trent looked at Collins, whispering, We can't argue with him. We just can't. Steven's gaze swept the three officers again. You will document every action. You will treat every citizen with dignity. You will obey lawful orders. And you will learn humility. Because if you don't, the law will make sure the consequences are worse than the embarrassment you feel right now. The officers' knees felt weak. They glanced at each other, realizing that the street, the crowd, the world watching through phones, and the new chief all held the power. Not them. Then Steven spoke, lowering his voice, but deliberately so the entire crowd could hear. Remember this moment. Remember how it feels to be powerless when you abused authority. Let it guide your decisions from now on. The bystanders erupted in murmurs of awe. One whispered, He's incredible. I've never seen anyone command respect like that without a fight. Steven finally turned slightly, scanning the crowd again, letting his calm but intense presence linger in the air. And to the citizens of Ridgewood, you deserve leadership that protects you, respects you, and upholds the law. I will ensure you get it. Miller, Trent, and Collins slumped, realizing that their arrogance, aggression, and ignorance had just met a force they could neither intimidate nor outwit. They were humbled, publicly, visibly, and irrevocably. The phones kept rolling. The crowd kept whispering. And in the middle of it all stood Steven Seagal, composed, calm, commanding, and fully in control. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was a lesson, one that every officer on that street would remember for the rest of their careers. The street had gone silent again, the kind of silence that feels heavy, almost tangible. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, waiting. Miller, Trent, and Collins stood frozen, their arrogance gone, replaced by an uneasy mixture of fear, shame, and disbelief. The envelope in Steven Seagal's hands had already been opened, revealing his appointment as the new chief of police, but the officers still didn't fully grasp the scope of what had just happened. Then Steven spoke again, calmly but firmly. Now that you understand the title, let me show you the authority that comes with it. He reached into the envelope a second time and pulled out a sealed letter from the governor's office. The gold-embossed seal glinted in the sunlight. The crowd leaned in instinctively. Even the nearby news crew, who had arrived after seeing the commotion online, started rolling cameras. This, Steven said, holding the letter aloft, confirms my complete administrative control over this station, its personnel, and its operations. From this moment forward, every decision, every action, every officer is accountable to the law and to me. The officers paled. Miller's knees wobbled. Trent tried to straighten his tie, but ended up looking more like a child caught in a lie. Collins, the senior officer who had once ruled the station with arrogance, clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles turned white. Evan Brooks, the rookie, whispered. They didn't think it could get any worse, but it just did. Steven gave the envelope a slight shake, then tapped it on his palm. You may have thought you were untouchable when you slapped me. You may have thought your badges gave you power over everyone around you. But power without accountability is nothing but chaos. And today, the chaos ends. Miller's voice cracked. We didn't know. We didn't know you were. Steven cut him off with a single, calm look. You don't get to use ignorance as an excuse. Your actions are your responsibility. Trent tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. We messed up. Yes, Steven said, his tone deliberate. You did, and now you must face the consequences. At that moment, another officer, Officer Ramirez, stepped forward, holding a phone. Sir, the video has already gone viral. Millions are watching this live. Steven nodded slowly. Exactly. Accountability isn't just here in this street. It's everywhere. The world is watching, and they are judging your behavior, not mine. I've done nothing but respond with composure and authority. The three officers' faces turned bright red. Their earlier bravado, their arrogance, their assumption of control, it had all collapsed under the quiet power of one man who refused to escalate, refused to fight violently, and refused to lose his dignity. Steven took a deep breath. Now, let's be clear. I will not humiliate you further. That is not leadership. But understand this. The moment you step out of line again, the consequences will be swift and inescapable. Public humiliation is only the beginning. Real consequences follow the law. And the law is no longer in your hands. It is in mine. The crowd, which had been tense and whispering, began to cheer softly. Cameras were everywhere, capturing the moment when the balance of power shifted. No one had to shout. No one had to fight. Authority had been asserted simply through presence, composure, and the undeniable truth of official law. Miller swallowed hard. Yes, sir, we understand. We will follow your instructions. Steven didn't smile. He nodded slightly. Good. Because this department is only as strong as its weakest link. And today, you exposed yours. Evan Brooks stepped forward, nervously smiling. Sir, what happens now? Steven's gaze swept across the street. Now, we rebuild this station. We set the standard. We serve the people, not ourselves. And we do it with integrity, humility, and respect. Every officer here will have a choice. Learn these lessons, or face the consequences I promised. Collins looked down at his shoes, visibly trembling. We, we will comply, sir. Yes, Stephen said calmly. Because there is no alternative. The crowd erupted, this time in applause and cheers. Some of the bystanders raised their phones to capture Steven Seagal's composed, commanding presence. Some whispered awestruck remarks. That's Steven Seagal, and he just humbled the police. He didn't even fight them, but they're scared out of their minds. This is legendary. Steven looked around at the crowd and the officers alike. He didn't gloat. He didn't taunt. He simply adjusted the letter in his hands and said, "Remember this moment. Remember what humility looks like. Remember that power is a responsibility, not a privilege. And remember that respect is earned through your actions, not your badge." The officers, now humbled and visibly shaken, nodded in unison. The street had transformed from a place of tension and chaos to a living classroom in authority, dignity, and justice. Even the civilians recording on their phones knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. One man, calm and composed, had turned the tables on aggression, arrogance, and abuse of power. And Steven Seagal wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. By late afternoon, the videos from Ridgewood County had already begun circulating online. Bystanders' phone recordings, combined with the local news crew's footage, were shared on social media with captions like, "Steven Seagal becomes chief of police, humbles rogue officers. Old-school martial arts master takes control without lifting a finger." Within hours, millions had watched. The clips went viral, trending across multiple platforms. Comments poured in from viewers all over the world, praising Steven's calm authority and condemning the officers' reckless behavior. On the street in Ridgewood, the officers who had previously acted with arrogance now moved quietly, heads bowed. Miller, Trent, and Collins had been summoned to internal hearings, but even before any formal consequences were delivered, the humiliation had set in. Their colleagues, who had watched the entire encounter unfold, avoided eye contact. Respect had shifted, and it wasn't theirs anymore. Steven Seagal, meanwhile, remained composed. He walked slowly down the street, the envelope of official orders still in hand. The civilians parted respectfully, many snapping photos or filming, but he made no effort to pose or seek attention. A young girl, about 8 years old, approached him with wide eyes. "Sir, are you really going to help the police be better?" Steven knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "Yes," he said softly, "but it's not just me. Everyone here, officers and citizens alike, needs to make the right choices every day. Leadership isn't about one person. It's about setting an example." The girl nodded, inspired. A nearby mother whispered, "That's the kind of role model our town needed." Word of the event spread quickly beyond Ridgewood. News outlets picked it up nationally. Headlines included, "Steven Seagal assumes police chief role, holds officers accountable in viral showdown." Martial arts legend shows the power of composure and authority. Even late-night talk shows began referencing it, playing clips of the encounter. Analysts debated, could one man's calm, firm presence really change an entire department? Social media hashtags like #SeagalChief and #RespectOverForce were trending worldwide. Back at the station, the previously arrogant officers received formal notices. Investigations into their behavior confirmed multiple instances of misconduct. They faced internal disciplinary action, mandatory training, and public reprimand. The humiliation on the street had only been the beginning. Accountability was now unavoidable. Meanwhile, Steven used the attention not to boast, but to teach. In a recorded interview for a news channel, he said, "Leadership isn't about fame or fighting skills. It's about integrity, discipline, and respect. Power is a responsibility, not a weapon. If one man can change the course of this station by staying calm and principled, imagine what an entire department can achieve by following the same principles." The story inspired countless people online. Comments from viewers read, "This is the lesson every officer should see. Respect isn't optional, it's everything. I want leadership like this everywhere." In Ridgewood, the effect was immediate. Officers began reviewing policies, training programs were revised, and public trust slowly began to return. Citizens felt safer knowing that their police force was now led by someone who demanded respect not through fear, but through example. And Steven Seagal? He continued his day with quiet authority, patrolling the streets, speaking with officers, and mentoring the department. The world watched, but he didn't seek the spotlight. The lesson, he knew, was far more important than personal fame. Finally, standing outside the station as the sun set, Steven looked around at Ridgewood, the streets, the civilians, the officers who now understood accountability, and he allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. The challenge was far from over, but the first step had been taken. The city, the officers, and the world had witnessed it. A legendary figure, calm, disciplined, and principled, had turned a chaotic, abusive situation into a lesson in leadership, respect, and justice. White Medium Star final call to action. If you believe power should be used responsibly, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Where are you watching this from? Comment your city and country below.